Ще раз доброго дня.
Good afternoon once again, colleagues. Mykhaylo Honchar is with us. He is the president of the Global Studies Strategy 21 Center, and he'll be talking about the reform of the Ukrainian gas transportation system.
He's the president of the Center for Global Studies Strategy 21, and he will speak to us about the reform of the Ukrainian gas transportation system. Thank you.
Дякую. Доброго дня.
Good afternoon. I'll try to be brief because the topic of the reform of the oil and gas sector of Ukraine, quite a lot has been said, and of course the main argument is about the government draft law linked to the gas transportation system of Ukraine, and in this connection I'd like to dwell upon several positions, several points about the need and feasibility of realization of these government plans. First of all, the government draft law that's been submitted to the parliament, which was already considered, has the right to live but is not absolutely necessary now. Secondly, it causes no doubt that by preparing this draft law and providing for its and adopted by the Parliament, the government tries to send additional signals to our European partners to act in along the lines of European energy legislation. This is positive aspect. This is a tactical element, component in creating a additional potential of interest towards Ukrainian gas transportation system. But the third point is that if we analyze the European gas energy legislation, then our obligations proceeding from our membership in the agreement on European Energy Partnership, you won't find any requirement there that 49% of the management of the gas transportation system has to be realized with the participation of a foreign partner. Everything that's demanded from the Ukrainian side, according to our membership in the energy community, according to the third package, is just the unbundling or distribution according to the type of business of our gas sector, which has to be done. When the process of taking the Ukretransgaz company, which operates both the gas transportation system and the system of underground storages of gas, this is the start of the process of unbundling. And in this sense, there's no doubt about the agreement of this process with the Treaty on European Energy Community. So the government is intent on fulfilling these obligations. Why there are questions about the 49% of the rights to gas transportation system with the participation of a foreign partner. The doubts are linked to the situation in which Ukraine is. De facto, this is the situation of foreign aggression, and we understand that any action, even linked to good intentions of reform in the gas sector and gas transportation system, will lead necessarily to some level of disorganization. And this is what we cannot allow under current circumstances. In principle, to take out the gas transportation system and underground storages from the system of Naftogaz, and to make a separate subject of economy out of them is logical. But when simultaneously we split the single complex into enterprises linked to main gas pipelines separately and to gas storages in its turn is not feasible now. We have to go through the critical period of the winter of 2014-15 so that the gas sector, the gas system works in a centralized and single technological way, especially taking into account the fact that in practice Ukraine is in the stage of gas blockade from Russia, and we see that this is to last. In this respect, the manageability of gas sector and gas transportation system acquires priority significance. This is not instead of the reform, but this is the change of the algorithm of the reform. The reform is not an end in itself. It has to provide the new quality of the use of gas transportation system and the system of underground storages, but not by disorganizing their work, especially during this critical time when Ukraine is subject to foreign aggression and gas blockade, especially with the threat of full stopping of gas delivery and transit flows of gas through Ukraine. So, number one priority from my point of view for the government and for the authorities is provision for technical safety, the protection of technical infrastructure, and taking us through the autumn and winter of 14-15 with as little loss as possible, especially proceeding from the extreme option when we face our problems alone and our European partners, however solidary they are with us, won't be able to help us. Because in the case if there's a rather cold winter, we do not exclude in Europe the deficit of gas on the peak of consumption, and this deficit can be created artificially by Russia, which is now preparing an option of, let's say, counter sanctions from Russia against EU as a response for EU sanctions against Russia. In this context, of course, the steps of the government are being taken in the direction of the provision for the work of energy system and gas transportation system in particular, taking into account these special periods. That's why I think that as far as the draft bill is concerned, which has already caused such a response in the society and in the parliament, we can arrive at a delayed decision. This draft law could be considered and adopted by legislators, but with a condition that it acquires, that it goes into force in a post-war period, after we go through at least the winter season of 2014-15, after we have reached certain agreements with Russia, taken into with the participation of the European Commission, of course, because we can't reach those agreements in bilateral format, and only after this the ideas that underlie this draft law can be launched into implementation. Without such approaches in the future, we can do, because the European gas transportation system, Ukrainian gas transportation system needs foreign investment. We also can use unique systems of our features of our system of the storage of gas underground. In order to reach this, we should make them more open and more acceptable for foreign participation, first of all, European companies. Some of them are ready for this, but under such circumstances, we cannot hope that they will rush to Ukraine after the adoption of the government bill. That's why we should hope for better, but we also should prepare for worst scenarios, and in order to live through them, we have to preserve the full manageability of the gas transportation system within the critical period. So this is what I wanted to say. If you have any questions, I'm ready to answer. Thank you for your speech. Can you tell us what this disorganization can lead to that you mentioned? Why do you think it will happen? And what, according to you, are other dangers? Won't they buy this gas and this 49%? Well, any reorganization, even not speaking of reform, of any enterprise, notwithstanding any sector, is the complete disorganization, especially when we speak about the emergence of two new entities, the main gas pipelines of Ukraine and underground gas storages, which are practically two new legal entities and economy entities, and every one of them will have two co-founders. On the one hand, Ukrainian government side, on the other hand, a potential foreign investor. So you understand that these puzzles cannot be very easily assembled. There will be a certain organizational period from the creation of Naftogaz Ukraine in 1998. In February, we saw the decree by President Kuchma. There was a need for 3 months to draw a special resolution of the government to implement this presidential decree, and the resolution came to the light of day by the end of May, and then we had almost 7 months until the end of 1998 for Naftogaz Ukraine to emerge as an organized structure. And you know, this was under the conditions of maximum assistance. Now, when we talk about the split and creation of new entities, especially with the participation of potential subject and entity, this means just an additional number of organizational chaos quantity, which we cannot allow ourselves. The other thing is, if we just take out Ukrtransgaz and transform it into a autonomous entity, this is what we should do and what we can do at the moment, and limit ourselves to this. And then, when we are living through the military or war period, we should work along the algorithm that is proposed, and then we may expect that instead of a theoretical partner in both enterprises, we will see specific companies. So far, not a single of these companies is known. Maybe the government knows something more, and I think that they know more than we know, but I still don't know who is not an abstract but a specific potential participant in such organizations. So the issue is not in the lack of the interest. There is an interest, but the conditions to implement this interest into life are not adequate, nearly adequate from the point of view of foreign investor, of whom we are talking now. if we go along to continue the issue of passing this law, the Prime Minister and other officials have more than once told us about the necessity of adopting this law under the pretext of if we don't accept this now, then tomorrow the southern flow will be in place and we should stop even thinking about our pipeline as a means of getting some money for the transit of Russian gas. The volume will dwindle to a minimum and we will lose a piece of our earnings. The Prime Minister said something about $4 billion per year. So the question is whether it is critical now. If we do not adopt this law now, the EU will give a green light for the construction of Southern Flow. Well, these issues are not as much intertwined as they say about them. More than that, the tangle of mutually entangled issues is much more significant than the issue of Southern Flow and the Ukrainian gas transportation system. The main thing is that if even Russia implements the Southern Flow, it will still need the Ukrainian gas transportation system as the ways of to access underground gas storages, which Russia needs very much in order to keep up the reliability of the delivery of gas to Europe, because neither northern nor southern flow do not have the necessary volume of underground gas storages. So in principle, on the one hand, the state's arguments, the government's arguments have their logic, but this logic cannot be considered 100%. This is just a part of argumentation. This is not the exhaustive argumentation. We have to understand the motives that Russia is being guided by when they are talking about Southern Flow, and the motives of the European side when they are first putting the brakes on the Southern Flow and then trying to allow it. Every side tries to play on their half of the field, and Russia tries to push through the Southern Flow, not only because this is written down in the strategy, I mean the priority of the creation of non-transit transportation systems, which they were going along for 10 years. The issue is that the Southern Flow, after the Northern Flow, has become a mechanism which I named more than once, and Russian experts who are not pro-Gazprom also said that they are this is a project of kickback. This, in essence, are the projects of export of corruption into Europe, and in this sense they are being already implemented. We see the construction site of the Southern Flow only on television, where they will together two pipes and show them in Russia or on Bulgarian coast. So the realization of a number of subcontractors, of corporate structures, both in Russia and abroad, and the interests of a number of figures who provide the political roof for this project. You know, this project is being implemented. During one of press conferences, I quoted certain figures, but I can quote them now, in order to sense that this is a very weighty argument to realize the Southern Flow project, irrespective of other arguments of Europe, Ukraine, or anyone else. So there's a number for you. The overall cost of all modules of the project, starting from the peninsula of Yamal and down to the coast of Black Sea, amounts to 56 billion euro. And the minimum norm, as far as kickbacks are concerned, as far as Gazprom realizes them, is 22%. So a clear cash is 12 point something billion euro. So now you can for yourself answer what is the stimulus for the implementation of the project this idea is. This is one of the answers to the question why there is war in Ukraine. This is not the major answer, but one of them. Because through a military scenario in Ukraine, Russia shows to European Union unreliability of Ukraine as a transportation point. However, this also causes hesitation on the part of the European Commission, which sometimes freezes the southern flow and then says it doesn't have anything against, but it should agree with European norms. So in this case, the government tries to some extent to work for the diffusion of this scenario, but these are necessarily, although insufficient, arguments in order to diffuse the scenario of southern flow. What is needed? In addition, a scheme or the change of the old archaic Soviet system of delivery of gas to the western borders of Ukraine, to replace it with another scheme to transfer the gas and accept it on the Russian-Ukrainian border. We are making our system according to European norms, and we are telling that it's going to be open and transparent, and we are ready to provide services to European companies, both de jure and de facto. And in this sense, the change of this scheme will have a great significance, although it does not depend entirely on Ukraine, because you can, of course, build gas transportation stations in the east, but European companies have also to agree to review their positions in their agreements with Gazprom. This can be done only with the interaction of cooperation from the European Commission, and we are again coming to the fact that the issue of the future of the gas transportation system of Ukraine lies in the close cooperation of Ukrainian government with European companies.
On railway supplies, and only in that way we can develop a critical mass of efforts and influences which will force to change rules of the game on this line of gas transit Russia, Ukraine, EU. Exclusively by steps of one side, it doesn't matter how correct they are, how well they meet European legislation. We will not be able to handle that. We need consolidated efforts. That's why I say that this draft law has, right for life, but it should be done in a proper point of time. One more point: why cooperation with other companies and countries is important. When not only they go around us, but also Slovakia, and then they go to branch to EU. So Slovakia and Ukraine, we are tied, and European Commission prefers that a checked, tested gas route works. That's why EU Commission suggested in Brussels Declaration a mechanism of assistance to Ukraine to modernize GTS, That was 5.5 years ago. So we have to come to that issue again too. Thank you. Thank you. Any question? How transportation of gas is related to storages on the territory of Ukraine? Transition is just transition. Why do we need storages, underground storage facilities? And the second question, what will happen to different regional gas transportation companies? To which enterprise will they belong to? If, for example, in some regions they have their storage facilities, in Cherkas region they don't have it. The function of GTS of Ukraine is it's not only about a transit of gas, as usually mass media try to show, especially abroad, in our pipes. All gas, internal gas, and gas which we buy from Russia, from Europe, and transit gas. So, 3 gas flows, so to say, they meet and they are in the same pipes. Gas storage facilities, and that is like gas accumulators. So the feature of GTS of Ukraine is that because we have a lot of storage facilities, we can accumulate that during the summer, that we can use in winter, and also we can use it technically support stability of transit to EU countries. That was always under Soviet times. In that technological sense, the function of GTS has not changed. And pipes are not separate from storage facilities, and also storage facilities cannot exist separate from pipes, because for gas to get to pipes, it has to go through storage facilities. So this is the linked technological facility, pipes and storage facilities. Yes, on a chart we can put them separate. When there is an enterprise of pipes, and there are also companies which are responsible for underground storage facilities. In Slovakia, there is an enterprise Ustream, that is Slovakian Ukrotransgas, and also there are 2 companies, Nafta and Pozagaz, that are set up on the base of those 2 underground storage facilities they have in Slovakia. They exist as separate commercial structures, commercial companies, but technological that works like one machine, linked, united machine. So we must have as a goal in the future, we should use such a Slovakia model to reform our GTS sector. But in Poland, for example, they have a different model. When a company operates a gas system, operates by pipes and manages also underground storage facilities, and it's not a problem at all. Coming back to your question of how some regional subunits of Ukrotransgas, how they exist in the future, that's a question to the future scheme of reforms. So it will depend. It will depend on the scheme. The question can be, if we have 13 underground storage facilities and 12, one in Crimea among those 13. In theory, on the base of every storage facility, we can set up a separate enterprise, like in Slovakia. But again, will it make sense? Probably not. Probably storage facilities, gas storage facilities in the east of Ukraine, they are more local. They are linked to local needs, to local industry and consumption. And storage facilities in the west of Ukraine, they are very powerful. That is the line spot of underground storage facilities, and they are meant to support export supplies. I mean, Russian transit to Europe. That's why here approaches should be different. In the government, realistically, they don't have such a scheme in the government. It will take some time. So that's why we should not speed up. We should not be in a hurry for us not to turn into, not to have a joke or additional problems in additional problems. Why should government initiate dividing these GDS into small enterprises? As I told you, in principle, if to take a Slovakia model, this is the way it works. Maybe somebody saw the experience of Slovakia and they liked it. I like it. I like that experience. But again, we have to remember that example looks nice from outside, but in Slovakia, for example, they've decided last year strategically to turn back to state ownership. 49% of package of shares of Ustream company, when there is a chance for that. 49% they were privatized in 2002 by a consortium of German Natural Gas and French Gaz de France US. In 2011, those companies decided to leave from the market and from the holding Slovensky Priemysl Premysl, and as such, so they left and they sold the package of shares to Czech Energy Holding, Energy Industrial Holding. Of course, they agreed that with the government of Slovakia. They were not happy with the decision, and because of that, government of Slovakia resolved an option of buying out that part of shares. So they have decided. They came to a conclusion that it's better if the government is taking care of in that infrastructure. 51% was belonged to the Ministry of Economy, and anyways, in their opinion, that has not provided complete control of the company. I wish we had their problems. If we look at economic and financial indexes and results of Ustream company, we will see that there was a growth, a trend of growth in direct and relative digits, and so that model worked. But Slovakia took into consideration when a foreign investor, because of their own motivations, make a decision that is problematic for the government, and the decision to steer of those French company and German company to leave the consortium for the government of Slovakia, it was an unpleasant surprise. And also there was one more story in Slovakia as to auto transportation system. They privatized it, and 51% was under control of the government, but as they found out that in practice that was just a formal act, that 51 was under control of the government. Really, they lost control of a Transpetrol company, and they costed them lots of efforts to take control back, and they purchased back those 49% and they result a very serious problem. So not everything is as attractive after the second consideration. So the government thinks in a correct direction, but we should not forget about the details, about experience of realization, and that in details there could be those stumbling stones that transform absolute normal European approach to something else. Thank you. I have a very brief question. Last week, leader of Svoboda faction in the parliament, Oleg Technibok, he told that it's very important to prevent a situation when reforms turn into a new age of privatization of GDS. So the question is, during reforms, can you stop companies with doubtful history? Or Gazprom, can you stop them from buying shares? Or Gazprom, through some offshore companies, they can buy our part of our infrastructure. Yes, there is such a threat, but affiliation, it's very easy to identify companies which are affiliated with Gazprom. It's not a problem. A different point is there should be a legislative barrier for participation of offshore companies. That's easy to solve. But I believe the main criteria here must be why government, when they explain their document, why they don't remember, they don't mention that point. There's one criteria when Gazprom and some other companies, any other companies affiliated, they just rebelled off. That is a criteria of work of those companies according to energy legislation of EU. Like the energy package, Gazprom is an enemy, and they recommend to EU to review the third energy package and to cancel it at all in general. But for us, it's a basis, a legal basis to reform our GTS. That's why Gazprom once, when they promised to Yanukovych cuts for gas in 2011 and 2012, they asked Ukraine to leave energy society because they wanted to get rid of that legal base that can be used by Ukraine to block participation of Gazprom in the possible consortium. So now, if we start with that our legal base, that is our membership in energy community, and the third package together with the second as key elements of the construction. And so then it excludes possibility of Gazprom to participate in this. But European companies that could be not affiliated with Gazprom, but could be partners and could play on Gazprom's side under some conditions, like those cut-offs. But also there is a prevention here. Nothing can be accepted, decision cannot be accepted if there is no agreement with the main shareholder, and that is the government of Ukraine that owns 51%. And again, a lot depends on details. So and a lot will depend on how that potential future agreement will be written. There could be some separate position in a small fund that will give some gaps. That's why Svoboda Party has some doubts, but that depends on adequacy of the work of lawyers who will accompany this deal if there is a decision on it. There is nothing horrible in this. Everything should be done based on the law. If that's the way it is, then the problem will be minimal. And if everything will be done like with Rosukrainer, who will have one more scheme. Thank you. And final question, how Ukraine can consume such a level of gas that how much gas should we consume to live through winter without gas stress from Russia? Very good question. If we take the first half of this year, then we consumed 24.6 billion cubic meters of gas in half a year. So if we in a year it will be 49 billion square meters. Last year it was 50.3. So this year, despite the war and gas blockade, we consume gas as if nothing happens, at least in the first half of the year. That's why that's a serious challenge for the second half a year. We have to reduce consumption of gas quick. First of all, industrial consumers and gas, chemical industry, and now we have to save on hot water during this hot time of the year. For us to have hot water in when it's cold. Now there are a lot of panic in media. What will happen if there is no hot water in Kiev? It's better if we don't. It's better we don't have hot water now than in winter. Of course, we cannot say exactly. We cannot speak about gas deficit because we don't know how cold this winter will be. According to our calculations, if it is our statistical, nothing horrible happens, and some discomfort, but we'll live through this winter. But as I told you, winter will be extremely cold. Russia will stop any supplies. Europe will not be able to help us with reverse gas because there will be a deficit of gas like it was in 2012. That's why we will have to deal with what we have. In this sense, it's important to achieve agreement in trilateral format, and negotiations were supposed to be in August, but there are vacations in Europe, and we have war in Ukraine, so negotiations will restart in September, and we need non-standard approach how to get out of the situation, and all three parties demand that. It doesn't matter what they say in Moscow. They also suffer because of this situation. They are underfunded. Then there's a risk that Europe will review its contracts with Russia, and a compromise in the format of previous negotiations, like dealing with debts, and then price issue, what we want from Gazprom. In that format, there is no prospects for compromise. We need some non-standard approach, and in my view, there is such an approach. It can help us for a half a year, for a year, maybe until arbitrage decision in court decision in Stockholm. It's very easy that the parties will forget all price and debt issues, and they will solve the issue. Like in 1990s, Russia transits its gas to Europe, and they pay for transit of gas. So they will pay gas for transit. So any calculations, any discussions about price and debts, we put them aside until court in Stockholm makes its decision, final or temporary. And of course, there will be. It's not easy to do because there will be the question of proportions for which amount volume of gas they have to pay. If to take 90s, the end of 90s, when the scheme worked, then in principle, for the transit of 110 billion cubic meters of gas, Russia paid 30 billion cubic meters of gas for Ukraine. There were some other proposals in other years, so that's coming out of that. That could be a temporal decision, but when we are in a dialogue one-to-one with Russia, in that sense, we will not achieve decisions. There should be an active participation of European Party of Europe, and they should not be like in the state of meditation, but they should be active and they should be consolidated with Ukraine because we are on the same boat. This is how briefly I would describe it. Maybe in September or October, the sooner we are to heating season, Moscow will be easier to agree. A decision like this can be achieved. Under one exception, if a militaristic approach will not dominate in Russia, then economic logic will not work. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We'll hope that New Year will be in warm houses with warm water. Well, we will hope. Yes, thank you.
Я швиденько нагадаю, що у нас наступний прес-брифінг о 15:30.
Next presentation will be at 3:30, and we'll have Mr. Gerashenko and Mr. Yachuk, Deputy Justice Minister of Ukraine, and they will tell us about the work of the committee to prepare the package of sanctions against